So, welcome. And let's get the official uniform back on because I've been walking around. I don't really uh, sit around with my jacket on, as you know. Just why would I do that? If I'm going to sit here in shorts, summer shorts, I'm just kidding. I'm not wearing shorts. I did that one time, though. I had uh, a big terror attack and got woken up in the middle of the night. Next thing I know, I'm sitting there in shorts trying to relay information. I may actually ask Frank about what that life is like when it comes to doing this job. It's an unusual part of the task. So good evening, Dan. Good evening, KKP, and my wonderful Greek friend Arcadian. And see Adam jumped in there also. And we'll have a talk with Frank Figliuzzi tonight. And I think this is a very interesting one that I want to remember because so many of our lives changed because of what was once called the Mueller Report, if you guys remember that. And having Bob Mueller not in the building anymore is a big loss for the collective good, if you will. And then tomorrow night we'll have Craig Unger joining us, and make sure that I think if Frank didn't get his notification that's sent there, sorry. I think it. One thing I noticed with this platform, we're real buggy about co-hosts and not co-hosts. It's a thing. I can't broadcast, for instance, with my software program, and even though I added a co-host, it doesn't bring in a co-host. It only allows me to go live with the phone or maybe even a tablet, and then do it at that moment. You can't set up broadcasting equipment for such a thing. So, but anyway, tomorrow night we'll have Craig Unger joining us as well, and we'll go into some depth about what's going on in parts of the world. But Frank, congratulations on your new interview project that's going on, and been enjoying last week's and this week's. And Sheldon Whitehouse recently batted out an incredible long, indictment, if you will, on Trump, and I wrote up a big piece about it afterwards. But great interview with him. And how are you enjoying it?
I'm enjoying it even more than I thought I would. Typically, I'm kind of a solo act, as you know, on my Substack show, which I'll shamelessly promote at the
Please do.
Frank Fig. Yeah, and my YouTube is the real Frank Figliuzzi. But I love this, and boy, it just 2 shows in now. By the way, this is a collaboration with Lincoln Square. They've been kind enough to invite me to collaborate and then to produce the show for me. And my first guest last week was Audrey Henson, known as the
Hmm.
Drake Dossier.
And your
Um,
and your nerdy friend Chris Sampson knew who she was.
See that? Yeah, I knew who she was because she represents the new breed of investigative journalists, which are relying
Yeah.
on open source and doing the hard work of finding the contracts and the bidders and going through the documents. And it reminded me so much of what FBI agents do for a living
Yeah.
to make cases that I invited her on as my very first guest. Now, today's show was Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and I got to tell you, I didn't know if he knew who I was, but he said yes.
Of
I
course he
I know
does.
my. He said yeah, and he said my staff knows who you are, and here we go. So check out my interview with Sheldon Whitehouse on Substack, my Substack, or Lincoln Square.
Mm.
And I'm having fun. I'm having fun. Now, sometimes I may not have a guest. Like I can expound for 45 minutes all by myself. But but it's also fun thinking who really would make a great guest. And I'm by the way, I'm open to those of you watching us right now. Hit me up with a DM, as they say,
Yeah.
and let me know who you think would bring in a lot of folks. Because
And I like the first one. You went like if I said who's going to be his first guest, I would have a whole list. I would think it was, and you hit me with a better one, meaning that I had seen her report about what's under the bunker. or
What's under the
what's under the
ballroom?
new East East Wing
Yeah.
ballroom, and she
Yeah.
nailed it. It was really great report, and like you said, she had dug through some things that would have evaded some of our what I think of as headline surfing mentality, where we follow the thing that was thrown out on the table, but we have very few people who will dig underneath, literally under the earth, for contracts and pull out that data. So that was a great find, and I
Well,
know
the
that.
other thing I like about what she does, and many, many others are doing, is after 8 years in mainstream corporate media, I know that they don't have the staffs to go
Right,
through the country. She's going through contracts and donors and figuring out what's going on with the ball and who are the contractors that are going underneath. Why is there a big Israeli connection? Why is there a database connection to these people? And
right.
the other thing she does is look, she's willing to say, here are my facts, and here are some conclusions or questions I'm raising, like, oh, is there a massive database being constructed under there? And
Right.
the mainstream media, Chris, just is does not have the capacity to do that, whether it's legal or standard, saying, oh, no, never engage in conjecture. What if we get sued? She never asked the hard questions, quite frankly, like, hey, is it a bunker or is it a database or is it both? Those kinds of questions can be asked by investigative journalists.
Yeah, and I think that that's really the job we have, and I'm going to include you as a we now because you're a journalist now in this mode. That we
Wow.
have a responsibility to our viewers to find out the information that while they're working their lives, we suss through all the data, we come up with, some substantiated information that is presentable, and then compartmentalize it for them to understand and do something with if we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could just talk for an hour about what is a journal today, right? What is a
Well, I
journalist?
could say, yeah, I could say this. We have a very special 3 hour broadcast for Bob Mueller tonight, and I'm glad
Three
that Frank
hours.
will be. I'm glad that Frank will be here for at least three and a half of those. No, but we'll do a bit of time. I wanted to specifically in this conversation acknowledge that I am very glad to know someone that worked with him, which is you, and I'm sure if I thought about it, there'd probably be some others. But you wrote an excellent piece the other day after he passed, and I just don't think people respect enough what Bob Mueller meant to the integrity of our legal system and his role. And then, of course, I think so many of us were affected by a very famous report he was responsible for overseeing in his job. So, if you wouldn't
Right.
mind, give us a
Yeah.
sense of who Bob is as we spend this next hour talking to our
Yeah.
friends
So
about like his value to our American legacy.
a couple of things up front. First, um, I never called him Bob, and I don't know many people who did. Maybe his wife. So
Mm,
he to us he was Sir or the director.
okay,
Um, and I say that because it's more than just semantics. It's who he was and how he operated, right? And how he carried himself. And yeah, that isn't, maybe back in Louis Free days when Louis Free was the director, there were folks calling him Louis,
right,
but not Mr. Mueller, not the director. No. So that's one thing. Secondly,
very
on the
important.
column, so in addition to doing one show a week for Lincoln Square on Substack and YouTube, I'm also writing one column a week for them as well, which you can find again on my Substack or their Substack. Um, and I felt okay when Mueller passed. I thought, okay, I guess do I write a column? I guess, yeah, sure, I have to. And it was the weekend, and I usually write on Mondays, but I go, no, this has to be ready for Monday morning. And I
Right.
really put me over the edge on, yes, you're doing the column, were a couple of folks on social media who said, well, sounds like a great public servant, but he failed his last assignment. And of course, that's a reference to the Mueller special counsel inquiry in the report. And the fact that, quote, he didn't take out Trump. And so I said, okay, all right, now I got to write the column. So,
Right.
so, and yes, I was upset too
Yeah. Yeah.
that in terrorism post 9/11, the counterterrorism folks kept using the phrase find, fix, finish. It's a military term. Find the enemy, fix your sights on them, and finish them. And that's for terrorism. And by the way, finish doesn't always mean kill. It could mean handcuffs. It could mean neutralize the threat
Right.
in any way you can. But I think so many of us thought, well, Bob Mueller is going to find, fix, and finish the Russian threat to our elections, and he's going to find Trump immersed in criminality, and there you go. But what I say in the column, first, a few things for those who aren't familiar with his life, and I'm convinced there will be a book or books written about Mueller. This guy is like, you can't, there's a reason why the Senate unanimously confirmed him as FBI director. And then, after 10 years of mandatory term service, the only FBI director to finish his 10-year term once that was set in stone, Obama calls him. So he's appointed by Bush, unanimously confirmed by the Senate. I'm in the room when he starts briefing us on the preparations for his retirement and transition.
Mm-hmm.
Then days later, I'm in the room with other assistant directors when he has taken a call from President Obama,
Mm-hmm.
who asked him to stay on 2 more years. And while Mueller joked
That was
that, I guess,
2013, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
2013, yeah.
Well, no, it could have been 12.
Okay.
2001, 2011.
Okay.
I think what we're talking about. Because he came in 2001, a week before the 9/11.
Right.
2001. So 10 years. Yeah, he gets the call in 2011 to extend. And again, he's unanimously confirmed for extension by the Senate. That doesn't happen today. Can you imagine the Senate, bipartisan
I can't
pass?
imagine the Senate showing up to approve anyone since they're just sent across the world to negotiate without any of that crap.
Yeah. And so here's a guy born real quick. He's born into privilege. He's born in Manhattan. He's from Park Avenue. His father's wealthy. His mother separately is wealthy. His father's an executive at DuPont, and the mother comes from railroad money. And this guy they send him off to a boarding school, St. Peter's in New Hampshire. He becomes captain of lacrosse, soccer, and hockey teams. And he could have lived a life of wealth and privilege, and he did not. He chose to become privileged by serving the public. He literally, when everybody's trying to avoid Vietnam, like, President Trump, who develops bone spurs and has a doctor put that in writing.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Mueller loses a friend from Princeton. He went off to Princeton, like his father did. And he loses a friend in Vietnam, and he volunteers for Vietnam. Who does that? And he goes to and not just volunteers, he goes to the Marines, and not just the Marines officer candidate school, but then he goes straight to Army Ranger School, which is very rare for a Marine who and he goes through that. Then they send him off to a very high death rate, high mortality rate base in South Vietnam. And lo and behold, in his very first combat tour, there's an ambush. He gets shot in the leg. He's rescuing his platoon. Long story short, he goes back to fight again, and he ends up he's rescuing another guy. He's got 2 Bronze Stars with Valor. He's got a Purple Heart, and he comes out. He's got a master's degree at NYU by now. And then his wife goes, look. By the way, he sees his baby daughter for the first time on a brief military leave to Hawaii out of Vietnam, and his wife's like, when you wrap this up, maybe think about law school. And he don't. Thankfully, he does, because he serves the rest of his in the law. And again, could have gone to a wealthy law firm, made big bucks. Nope, becomes a prosecutor, runs circles around everybody, becomes the U.S. attorney in San Francisco. He's a prosecutor in Boston, and then finally he takes a brief break, like a year, in a private high-end law firm, and he can't stand it. And He calls the U.S. attorney, by the way, at the time was Eric Holder in the District of Columbia.
Right.
And Holder had worked for Mueller when Mueller was assistant attorney general. And he calls Holder and goes, I see you have a job opening for a line homicide prosecutor. And Holder goes, oh, okay, when can you start? And so that I just want to set the table there for the kind of guy we're talking about.
Right. Who
Yeah.
does that anymore? Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, he when he becomes director, it literally is 1 week before 9/11 and the terror attacks. And he's still trying to find out all the nooks and crannies of the FBI, not just where's the cafeteria and the men's room, but what does the FBI do? What are all these divisions? What happens at Quantico? How many field offices? Blah blah blah. Do I trust my staff or not? Are they loyal to Louis Free or who or what? He's figuring that all out, and again, the worst terror attack on FBI on in FBI history and U.S. history occurs, and he's left to deal with that. And as if that's not bad enough, because of the attacks, half the people in Washington think the FBI needs to go away. It failed. It's too big. There should be two agencies, one for domestic intelligence, God help us, and the other for criminal. And he holds all of that off, and more importantly, slowly turns the FBI into really a part of the intelligence community, an agency that can engage in predictive analysis and stop the bad things from happening, not just the famous investigative agency that can tell you all about the bad thing that happened. Right? That's
Right.
very
Right.
nice, but now we need to stop the bad thing. So that will be his legacy. And I was concerned in the obituaries that I kept reading that, understandably, what's overshadowing and first paragraph of the obituary is served as special counsel investigating the Russia interference in the election, and Trump hates him. And I thought, God darn it, okay, that's he didn't even have to do that. He was in retirement. What are you doing? And so, yeah, I go there in the column? I absolutely do. I'm happy to talk about that as well if you want to.
Yeah, I think we should actually, and the reason why is that I have a very different opinion of the FBI after that era because of the work that was done like that. The FBI has, especially I come from the type of politics where you would have people rail against, the 60s and the 70s era and
Yeah,
certain failures that were like definitely tarnished the legacy of
yeah,
the organization. And yet, because I've done the civilian counterterrorism work, I really respect the amount of work that goes into protecting Americans. That if we didn't have the OC3 connection to report or phone calls and field offices, we'd be in worse shape. And so I have a different working relationship as a person who would see bad things and make the phone call.
yeah,
And I think that era of change, that you're referring to, is missed and misunderstood by the general public. And now we have a new era of the FBI on us, unfortunately, to
yeah.
deal with, that reels us back even further. So let's talk about that. Let's stay on that for a minute
Well,
about
well, I
the
do.
changes. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, the changes are awesome. I mean, I want to let's go back to that 60s, 70s era, the J. Edgar Hoover
Yeah,
era for a second, where there were tremendous abuses, warrantless wiretaps,
right.
what we call black bag jobs, where the agents would break in and plant evidence or steal
Yeah,
evidence
yeah.
or both. Perhaps one of the most horrific moments in FBI history. J. Edgar Hoover drafts a letter to Martin Luther King Jr. suggesting he kill himself. Illegal wiretapping of MLK. How about the FBI's part in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago by a special Chicago police unit?
Hmm.
Yeah, horrible things that we
When I
should
when I
not.
watched that guy that was Omali Yeshitela, who was caught up with the Russians, in the case a couple of years back, he's like, well,
Yeah,
Fred Hampton wasn't, and the first name that comes out is, It
Bingo.
wasn't Russians who killed Fred Hampton. That was the FBI.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those memories are not gone for certain communities, understandably.
Which is why we must have FBI leadership and an attorney general who are well immersed in that horror story so that
Hmm.
every day they can defend civil liberties, and Mueller's famous at almost every speech he would give, he would throw in his line that securing the nation and securing civil liberties are not mutually exclusive. We can do
Amen.
both. And I want to give you the prime example of that before we go to the special counsel
Sure, of course.
situation.
Yeah.
So what people really need to know about his tenure at the FBI, because again, special counsel was post FBI, is the story of, I mean, what a story. And I'm not going to do it justice. And I encourage everybody to look it up, but it's sometimes known as the hospital drama. So
Hmm.
this after 9/11, and it's actually like March of 2004. George W. Bush, who appointed Mueller, is still the president,
Hmm.
and Jim Comey is the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General.
Hmm.
Mueller's the director, and John Ashcroft, who is the Attorney General, is deathly ill in a hospital bed in Washington. He is, according to most people, he is near death in agony with pancreatitis and a gallbladder problem.
Hmm.
Okay, and he had ultimately, I think he had to have the gallbladder come out.
Right.
So because he's incapacitated, that means that Jim Comey, the Deputy Attorney General, is now the acting Attorney General. And what he finds out, and Mueller finds out, is that George Bush has unilaterally approved a program called Stellar Winds, which
Hmm.
is which authorizes by the president NSA to spy on phone calls and internet activity, including content, by the way, not just metadata, not just who you dialed on your phone, but the conversation, not just who you emailed on your computer, but the
Yeah.
content of the email. And for those who don't know, NSA is not supposed to spy on Americans in America.
Hmm.
Right? They're not even supposed to spy on Americans overseas unless there's like special incidental coverage or some special authorization. Okay. So Comey finds out and Mueller finds out the NSA has been authorized to spy on Americans with no warrant. Here,
Hmm.
here. And so here's where the hospital thing comes in. It's up for the program is up for reauthorization. And the White House decides that it's Ashcroft that needs to sign off on it now.
Hmm.
Ashcroft is barely functioning in the hospital bed, and so the son of a guns at the airport, which at the White House, would you like me to name them? How about White House counsel Alberto Gonzales?
Remember
How
him?
about White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card?
Remember him well.
Okay, so now this is a movie. They're now speeding towards the hospital to get Attorney General Ashcroft, who's incapacitated, to reauthorize, like literally hold a pen in his hand and have him reauthorize this illegal program. Comey and Mueller have confirmed it's illegal. They checked with their lawyers. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal search and seizure.
Hmm.
They're racing to the hospital. Comey gets there first and doesn't wait for the elevator. He's running up the stairs to Ashcroft's room. Ashcroft has FBI security detail at the door, and Mueller calls the FBI detail on the phone and says, "Do not. You're about to get confronted by high-ranking White House officials, Gonzalez and Card. They may have Secret Service agents with them. Imagine this standoff.
Hmm.
And you are not, under any circumstances, to let them order Comey out of the room." So this is like oh my God, right? I mean, wow. All right. And Ashcroft's wife is there and she's in on it. She's like, no one's coming in here but Comey. so
Wow.
and Comey is trying to stop this signature, right? And he does. Ashcroft is lucid enough to say, Comey's in charge. When Andrew and Card and Gonzalez show up, he says, Comey's in charge. And so now Mueller has to go to the White House and he's up all night. At 1:30 a.m., Mueller signs a letter of resignation. He's going to
Right.
resign. Comey agrees to resign, and their top staff agrees to resign if Bush reauthorizes this illegal spying program.
Jeez.
And you know, Bush. Let me just cut to the chase.
Go for it.
Mueller went in. Comey first goes into the president and says, "We're all resigning." Bush turns pale. He has visions of the what is it, Saturday Night Massacre,
Right, right.
under where everybody resigns. He's pale, and he basically says, "Let me talk to Mueller." So Comey goes and gets Mueller, who's outside. Mueller comes in and confirms, "I've got a resignation letter in my pocket. I'm out if you do this." And Bush backed down, and they ended up recrafting the thing in a legal fashion. So, for anybody wondering, was Mueller really the guy who tried to protect the Constitution and civil rights? The answer is yes, and perhaps no better example than that.
And as you're relaying that history, I remember very well because for our viewers who don't know me, Chris Sampson, your host here in Kiev, while Frank is in America. I ran a site and or project called Cheney Watch because of those abuses I saw were happening in that administration, and there were a lot of things flagging
Dick,
my whole life back then.
Dick Cheney was absolutely a part of this illegal
That's
program.
right.
Yeah.
And then so and I said back at the time, if you don't stop these monsters, there will be a worse monster. I didn't know it'd be a failed real estate guy I grew up watching on television being a completely gaudy, paint everything gold guy, but the precursor was there. Let's imagine that for a minute. Let's reach out in the void as if one day some guy named Donald Trump had the same sets of tools in his hands. Well, what do you think would have happened?
Well, so I'm gonna go to a darker place than that.
Go for it.
He does have the tools right now, and we don't know what he's done with them. We don't
No.
know if something like I just described, illegal wiretapping of American citizens, we don't know if that's happening or not right now. And where's the Mueller and where's the Comey in that administration that will threaten to
Exactly.
resign? It's not happening. And I think someday we're going to find out that there were illegal programs? Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
And it's I think that's where a lot of our viewers right now are probably most concerned. If there's anything I've learned about who watches your program and who tunes into what I'm reporting, they really are interested in accountability at a level that is rapidly disappearing in the press and in the official state apparatus, and they want some, I don't want to say it's light in the darkness per se, but at least some sense of something to hold on to, something to to put foot on terra firma.
Yeah, yeah, and
And
look,
our
I never.
viewers, you can tell us, we can read your comments. So if we're off, you could say, "No, we want entertainment."
Hey, let's segue into what everybody kind of itches about with regard to Mueller, which is the special counsel inquiry. And
Sure,
here's the context I and framing I put on this. I
go for it.
share I share the disappointment that that special counsel inquiry did not hold enough people accountable. I remind people 30 individuals plus organizations were indicted
Hmm.
by Mueller.
Yeah,
I remind people, and many of our viewers here right now don't need any reminding of this because they've read portions of the report, maybe all of it. But that 24 Russians were
hmm,
indicted in an unprecedented case involving hacking by the Russian government, 12 GRU officers from the Russian military intelligence service,
right,
um, about a dozen oligarch and private hackers and propagandists who are responsible for trying to reshape how the American mind thinks about the
right,
election. All of that was exposed. Mueller clearly found that Putin and the Russian government were trying to act on Trump's behalf and help him. with the
Hmm.
election. That's been proven. If you've got, if your Uncle Joe or your neighbor says that was never proven, it's right there if they want to read. Um, okay, so what Mueller doesn't do is say, I am indicting the president of the United States. He does say, I have 10 examples of obstruction of justice.
Hmm.
And the dutiful, and here's, a spoiler alert from the end of my column, that dutiful lieutenant, that Marine lieutenant, who
Hmm.
I just described earlier, who was in combat, um, following orders. He followed the orders. He did fulfill his assignment, which was to provide the report
That's
and
right.
hand it to his so-called superior officer, as a good Marine would. He knew Bill Barr. He knew him, he thought, because he had worked with Bill Barr before at
Hmm.
Justice. Remember, this was the second go around for Bill Barr as Attorney General. Mueller had worked for him. So, yes, he hands this incredibly thorough report, ready for indictments, ready for whatever needs to be done. He, of course, notes that, yes, I'm aware of a policy that says we don't indict a sitting president and blah. We don't mess with elections. But here you go, sir. Boom. And he absolutely was the dutiful lieutenant, but we didn't need a dutiful lieutenant at that moment in our history. We needed a lieutenant who somehow would be able to discern that the superior officer was not superior to him, and in fact
Hmm.
may have been the adversary. And that was the flaw, right there. So who failed there? Did Mueller fail in his assignment, or did the institution of justice fail, and did Bill Barr as an individual absolutely fail with issuing a 4-page summary that totally misled the public about what Mueller had found?
Absolutely did.
And did Mueller come out after that shocker and in writing go to Barr and say, you misled us? This is misleading what you just did? Yes, he did. That's my take on those who say that Mueller failed and fail to say that Bill Barr and justice failed Mueller and
I
all
think
of
that's spot on. I think that's spot on. And especially as someone who I put way too much time as part of my job to understand all of those widgets back in 2016 onward, the frustration of getting that close with information. And I'm on a different side. I like the unredacted part of the report, meaning if you know the case well enough, you can read behind the black spots, even when there are pages and pages and pages of black spots, as you know. Um,
it.
but if he's not tasked with doing the coup de grace, then he is not going to perform that. He's going to do what he was tasked to do, and he did it decisively.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've learned the lesson here. And you know who applied the lesson or tried to? Special Counsel Jack Smith. Special Counsel Jack Smith
Exactly.
saw what happened to Mueller, and he absolutely was going to indict Trump. I'm convinced that was happening
Hmm.
in 2 cases: Mar-a-Lago in Florida and the January 6th attempts to overthrow the election with alternate electors from states. So we've already learned that lesson. So when I say we won't have another public servant like Mueller, I don't just mean the decorated Marine, blah, blah, blah,
Sure.
blah, blah.
Right.
I mean, because technically, yeah, we could find somebody someday like that. But I mean, we also will probably not have a special counsel who trusts the boss or the Justice
Hmm.
Department. Yeah.
It's a very good point, and I want to go back to parts of that case for our viewers and how it works because we have people who were, shall we say, returned to normality. Mike Flynn, as an example. When I saw Papadopoulos barking off on Twitter about how innocent he was and people defending him, I said, so let me get this straight. Did you lie when you were indicted for lying, or did you lie when you basically said you're sorry that you lied, or at what point,
Right.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so let me get this straight. All of these, I lied and therefore, yes, I'm a bad guy. What?
Yeah.
with those lies, because I would
Right.
love for them to say yes. Then we
Yeah.
would do the
You pled
process
guilty.
all
Michael
over again.
pled. He pled guilty.
Yeah.
He pled guilty. So where was the lying? Yeah. It's this issue of normality is something that keeps coming up, which is there's a bias toward normalcy in all of our lives. It's
Yeah.
particularly true with the mainstream media, which is, things like, oh, what's going on under the ballroom, right? Oh, it's a ballroom.
Okay.
What's
Right.
the big deal? Oh, he's probably built extending the bunker and maybe there's some new situation rooms going in. It's normal.
Right.
No, it's not normal. Not anymore. And so, you know,
Yeah.
we say Michael Flynn's return to normalcy. How about his oath to QAnon? How about that? Are we forgetting that? Right? It's all is not normal. It's not normal.
And I think that when we look at the ramifications of those reports, especially, I now live in day 1400 and whatever day I'm on, 1444, a full scale war here in Ukraine. And in that summer of 2016, it was Trump who sent in J.D. Gordon to tone down at the request of Manafort, no less, to tone down the language that no one else was touching. No one else was interested in going in there and toning down the language about Ukraine. Only Trump's team. It was unheard of. The delegates at the time didn't understand this. Why are we doing that? That's not the GOP line. And that those summers have consequences. I mean, to think that that was 10 years ago, you know?
My God. You know, you know, Trump has become a master at making us numb on this normalcy theme that we're on.
Mm-hmm.
Look at all the things that are becoming normal to us. How about this? How about ICE agents with long guns at our airport? How about that?
Yeah, I've
Right.
seen this. Yeah.
And how long will it take for many people to go, "Oh, I guess that's normal now." Listen, I'm telling you, I know we have a savvy audience here, but just a reminder. Number one, that's not normal. Number two, that's not about helping TSA folks. It's not. I've seen enough video now and accounts from people at airports who are not seeing ICE in any helpful way assisting those TSA agents, who, by the way, are not getting paid.
Right.
I don't see them stacking the gray, X-ray containers with your shoes in them. I don't see them checking IDs at the desk when you finally get to that line 5 hours after you've been in it. They're walking around with long guns and smoking and joking people. And what is that about? Intimidation and establishing normalcy so we get used to having Trump's police all around us with long guns. That's
Right.
what that's about.
And one of our viewers said, Caitlin said boiling frog, which was exactly the phrase that was going through my head with that. So thank you, Caitlin, for properly throwing that on the table. You make a great point about this. Trump tests the waters repeatedly for what he thinks he can get away with, and he just waits for the reaction. And if the news bureaus don't take a more aggressive tone with it, and they go just wall to wall coverage of that, they're going to get away with it. They're going to get more people just going, I guess it's maybe not that big a deal. It's not on the news.
What I see happening is, and it's been happening. This is not any great analysis, but most of us know when you're watching corporate media, there's usually a cutoff at about. It depends on the network, but sometimes it's at 3 or 4 p.m. Right. So the
Hmm.
daytime coverage is, it's pretty much news reporting. Now, are there editorial decisions about what to cover and what the tone is? Yes, of course. But essentially, you are going to get some mostly news reporting.
Hmm.
You may not like the tone of it and what they choose to cover, of course. But
Hmm.
at magic hour of about 4 p.m., you start getting into opinion shows. It depends again on the network. Opinion and analysis. But here's my problem. We're get on opinion and analysis. We are getting show hosts and guests saying, "I don't think ICE is helping TSA." We're getting that. We're not getting it in the actual hard news reporting. And you might say,
Right.
well, Frank, that's not hard news. And I would take issue with that. It is. It's hard news, when you've got a reporter with a camera and a microphone at an airport and they don't see an iota of help being offered by ICE
Right.
to TSA.
Right.
That should be reported. Instead, what are we hearing? Oh, the line at Houston is 5 hours long. Yeah. But I want to know, what is ICE doing right now? Or are they in the Starbucks at the airport drinking coffee? That's what I want
Right.
to know. Yeah.
And it's both of us have been on television to be the voice. Like in my case, it was a terrorism. Like, what happened today? Well, we have a mass shooting, and we relay our few minutes of experience and wisdom, and then we're off. And the next thing comes on and changes the topic. It's 8 minutes long, 5 minutes long. Digest quick, change subject, go to the next thing. Digest quick, change, go to the next subject. And it's hard for people to grasp. But here on this platform, we can get more into specialized information that develops the understanding in the population.
You're right, and thanks for bringing that up, because that is what the platform is about, and that is what you do. That is what I hope to do, which is both. I say I'm trying to distill the chaos and confusion of the weekly news
Hmm.
into what you need to know. You don't need to, adhere to what I think you need to know, but it's what I think is worthy of analysis for the
Right.
week. Because there's
Right.
just too much going on in the news cycle. And then when I have a guest, and again, today's show, I had Senator Whitehouse. We just hit two cases, two topics, boom. Um, and that's the hope, is to do the deep dive.
Right.
Yeah.
There's one thing you said there. I'm gonna bring it back in here because it relates to the Mueller report. Why Donald Trump likes to bash on fucking everybody except one particular pasty dude in the Kremlin, that no matter
Yeah.
what happens, he's got never a dull word to say about that guy, you know?
He will strike out at virtually everyone except Vladimir Putin. And
Mm,
look, and that's where Sheldon Whitehouse, that's where Senator Whitehouse went today with me on Substack. He said, "Look, come on," and he's asking the questions. Does he have the conclusion? But the evidence is overwhelming. He calls it the Epstein Russia Trump triangle. You
hmm.
say that all one breath: Epstein, Russia, Trump, and the evidence is overwhelming. And we go into it on the show, that if you really showed it to anybody and they were capable of believing facts, um, they would say these are all linked. These three people are all linked.
Right.
Putin, Epstein's in the middle of this, by the way, and it's there. The money's there. The Russian girls and women are there. The $500 million net, excuse me, $500 million net worth, that's unexplainable, that Epstein has. The $1 billion at least wire transfers to Russian sanctioned banks. Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, and his mysterious death, and him operating
Yeah.
the Russians and the Israelis. And how about a document that's come out, that from the top of the KGB, saying that Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's father, was a Russian intelligence asset.
Right.
Uh, yeah, yeah.
I want to put your counterintelligence hat on a second, but before we get there, I'm gonna go Mr. Conspiracy Theory, which I normally don't get to do, and neither do you. We don't. If there's one thing I like about the way you do things, and I definitely don't like doing it, is we don't do conspiracy theory thought. You can gamify, you can kind of lay things out, but then you stay in the facts lane. But let's go to something that's used to sound completely like just nut job level. Like, really, you think billionaires are like hunting people now? I mean, wait, do you think that billionaires would like, pay big money to just torture someone in a? And after reading all these Epstein files for the last few months, I think movies like Hostel are not so crazy anymore as a reach. I have now seen psychopaths with the highest level of budgets and imaginable to do whatever they just have a whim to do. Yeah.
The thing is, remember when we thought QAnon was completely insane? That the idea that the elites are running the world, and they eat babies, and they're pedophiles, and they drink blood. Well, what the question we raised today on the show with Senator Whitehouse is, was that projection? Was that really crazy? Or is that, saying, don't look at me, look at you. Don't look
Right.
at us. It's not us doing this, but yes, we are. And you know, and I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but I
Sure.
know that. Here's what I do know. I am I am flummoxed by the idea that we don't have FBI agents who worked early on in Florida, the Epstein case, who are good agents. We don't have those people, and then the New York agents who worked it. We see their
Hmm.
work product. We see re-interviews of multiple victims.
Right.
We don't see them coming out, even those who have retired by now, and and many have. We don't see them coming out and saying, "Here's who told me to shut this down. I'm livid that my case got shut down. I'm livid that kids were getting harmed, and it got shut down." And they told DOJ told the state of New Mexico to stop their investigation at Epstein's Zorro Ranch, and I'm
Hmm.
livid
Hmm.
of that. Where's the Albuquerque FBI agent who had that case, if at all, or worked it at all?
Right.
Why? Then I ask, okay, if we're talking about solid FBI agents and they did their work, what would cause FBI agents to not come out as whistleblowers?
Hmm.
And here now, this is my conjecture, because about 3 million of the files we're not seeing from DOJ may contain national security classified information.
Fair.
And those
Right.
and those agents might be thinking, I'm going to get charged with leakage of national defense information. And so,
Hmm.
for those, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the possibility that there is an intelligence service involvement with Epstein. And so,
Hmm.
and I don't know. I don't know if it's ours. I don't know if it's Russia's. I don't know if it's Israel. I don't know if it's all of the above. I can tell you this from my 25 years in the bureau:
Right.
any intelligence service worth their salt would be remiss if they stumbled on somebody like Epstein and didn't try to operate them.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, just a thought.
No, I think that that's spot on. That's actually one of the instincts I've had about watching these things develop over 10 years is that you like I'm thankful I've never had intelligence clearing. I would never want it. It would be a burden. It'd make me like not sleep well at night. Um, but if you have a sense of what was in the Mueller report 1 and 2, and for a reminder, number one found the information, number two was about the obstruction, or the second report was about obstruction. You merely look at his final when he came to do his testimony, and I remember very well what it sounded like when he was speaking. Um, that he was asked explicitly why he didn't find the president guilty per se, etc., and he made it clear. He goes, "Well, that wasn't his mandate. But could you have found this? Eh,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
clearly, it was all there."
I'll also add the obvious for those of us who watched in dismay that testimony, because by then Mueller was clearly in ill health.
Yeah, Parkinson's, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And whether he knew it at that time or not, I actually don't understand the chronology of it. But
Sure, sure.
yeah, yeah, his family has said he had Parkinson's. And yeah, and those who worked with him at the near the end of that assignment said he wasn't himself. He wasn't
Right.
himself. Yeah.
But I think that his final testimony to the nation was very important in that capacity to come forward and to take those questions, for those of us who will bear the mantle from that day forward. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write a piece today and then bring you on, was to talk about that. Now it's in our hands to do
Yep.
to do the work that Robert Mueller started.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. We just need the right people in the right places. And that's easier said than done, but it'll happen. Hey, thank
Let's
you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Mueller and other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to stick with one more thing to the counter. I want to get on this counterintelligence side because now we
Yeah.
have two big old wars, and that's your specialty. In my the current wars, according to Sun Tzu article a couple weeks ago that I keep building on, I keep using as a reference article to start from chapter 13, the deployment of spies. I had to write in there that Sun Tzu could not have imagined a general that would have no intelligence, no interest in intelligence, no desire for counterintelligence. That was not in his calculation at all. Period. It's just not in there. And now we're in an era where, because of that, era 10 years ago, where we literally have the leader of the free world with all that he has in hand doing that, while Pete Hegseth claims we're the mightiest on earth. Where are we at, Mr. Counterintelligence expert guy?
Oh boy, I vacillate here between design and incompetence. So, and by the way, they're not mutually exclusive. Here's what I mean. Yes, we have total incompetence in the White House. Well, let me not say the White House, the Oval Office,
Hmm.
and at the DoD. And we are at war being led by incompetent individuals.
Hmm.
So it's very easy to say we have we have bumbling idiots in charge of a war, and now the 82nd Airborne has been deployed and the Marine Expeditionary Units, and this is going to get awful. And by the way, how much lead time are we giving Iran to say, oh, we're going to attack Karg Island? And Iran, they're putting bombs and mines around the island, and they're deploying. This is warfare, and
Right.
so yes, you can say this is, my God, these people don't know what they're doing, and you would be right.
Right.
On the other hand, maybe the incompetence is part of the plan, and by that I mean, are we looking at smarter people around Trump
Right.
who actually, or even in Moscow, who actually want everything to break? He's
Right.
broken our institutions. He's broken the credibility and trust we have in even the Centers for Disease Control. Putin must be laughing on a daily basis that we no longer. Do you know that I just saw the news before I came on here that Trump has decided to call timeout on appointing any new Centers for Disease Control director because they cannot find anyone that agrees with the lunacy of RFK Jr. They can't. No
Who
one
just
in
got
the
slapped down in court the other day, no less.
right, exactly. So here, can you imagine what those interviews are like with RFK and applicants for CDC director?
Thank,
Do you
thank you. I have that voice that he makes in my head
right?
now when you
Oh,
said
I'm sorry. Yeah. Are you okay if we stop all
it. I'm,
vaccines?
I'm,
Are you okay
I'm
with
triggered.
are you okay with kids dying of measles? And I can see the applicant going, no, I'm not really okay with that, Mr. Kennedy.
Right.
Out, you're out. So Trump has had to
Uh,
call time. So my point, here's my point. I fear that this is a part of a larger strategy to absolutely sow complete chaos on a global level. And I don't know what to do with that idea. But I know this. I know that Vladimir Putin would pay billions of dollars for any intelligence service program that would have gotten us where we are right now, and he's getting it essentially for free.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we in on the home front, when we have people are reading about, Iran wants to take action against, soft targets, and be wary of drone attacks throughout the United States, etc. I mean, I live in an area where, maybe people think of Shahed drones. We had 1,000 of them here across Ukraine yesterday. But also, I know a lot about actual drone warfare. That's what I study and work on. That's what I was in Donetsk this weekend interviewing drone
Oh,
teams,
sure.
and it isn't hard to imagine something more creative than 9/11 happening on American soil. And isn't that the job of essentially the agency, is to think about all the possibilities, and especially when we're talking about the adaptation throughout the 2000s of
Mhm.
the FBI becoming, essentially that type of intelligence as well.
Yeah.
um, you know,
Yeah.
take that for a minute about the domestic threat, and I don't mean a domestic threat by the right wingers. We could do a whole show on that. But the home terrain threat that is now, I think, unattended. To be honest with you.
Look, we don't even know the actual number of FBI personnel that have exited the agency. Um, Congress has asked the director for those numbers. They've said, "Is
Hmm.
it 5,000?" He doesn't seem to tell that number publicly, but it's a
Hmm.
lot of people. It's a lot of people. It may be 5,000 people, and that's an organization of 36,000 people with only 14,000 gun and badge agents, if they even have that anymore.
Right.
And where did he take the agents from to work
Mm-hmm.
the migrant roundups with ICE, the Joint Terrorism Task
To
Forces?
chase Antifa.
Oh God! Well, you know what? They're celebrating their first convictions, and I wrote a column on this. My previous last week's column was
Yeah.
about what happened in a federal courtroom in Fort Worth, Texas, which was they convicted 8 people of material support to terrorism, Chris, a statute that has been used for international terrorists.
Hmm.
And what terrorism group per se, pray tell, do you think they belong to? The prosecutor said they were Antifa, and so
Hmm.
and the jury went, okay, I guess. And so that's there we go. There we go. So are we vulnerable right now? Yes. Do we know how many people have exited? I know this. The senior leaders with 20, 30 years of experience were walked out of the building. If you had anything to do with January 6 cases, Mar-a-Lago cases, firing FBI employees who would not take the COVID vaccine, you were out the door. And now, if you had
Hmm.
anything to do with working the Mar-a-Lago case and requesting phone records on the director, the now director, or Susie Wiles, you're out the
Hmm.
door. So I don't know who's left. I don't know.
Well, then, final comment, and then of course you can always come back, and I'm glad you do, and our friends are glad you do. I want to know, in light of who we're honoring, Robert Mueller, the next generation of young people who want to go into law enforcement and justice work. What's the beacon of hope for them to want to take that on, as chaotic as things are? What would you say to someone who, 18, 19 years old, getting out of high school, wants to go to college, and there's
Yeah.
all sorts of options, and there's just that one or two, because it's a small percentage of people who want to go all the way to the FBI.
Mhm.
You know, I wanted to do it because of Twin Peaks. I thought Dale Cooper was the best guy out there. I wanted to
Yeah.
be that guy.
Yeah. I hope it remains competitive. I don't know. It used to be an incredibly arduous journey to get in. Okay, look, first to the 18 or 19-year-old, I tell this to anybody. It is a noble calling and not for everybody. It is
Hmm.
not a career, it's not a profession, it's a vocation. And
Hmm.
if you they ask me, what do you mean by that? I mean, your life will not be your own, because you're in service of the public. It's nights, weekends, holidays, and your kids' games and your kids' birthdays and Easter Sunday dinner being interrupted by the phone call. Okay,
Hmm.
you're ready for that. Then I say to the 18 or 19-year-old, get a well rounded education. And I know, by the way, that we're headed in the opposite direction. I know that they're, for example, for ICE and even for the FBI, they're starting to, under certain circumstances where you have prior law enforcement, they're waiving the college degree requirement. That's a
Mm.
disaster.
Yeah, very
That's a
much so.
um, now. What do I mean well-rounded? I mean, I have tons of young people who approach me and go, I'm going to major in criminal justice because I want to be an FBI agent. And I look at them and I go, oh no. Okay. So even though the current director says FBI agents are cops, they are not. They have a lot more on their plate than violent crime. And they have national security, incredibly complex transnational white collar crime, organized crime, corruption, civil rights, all of that. And you need the well-rounded brain to
Hmm.
work all of that and to relate to people at all levels, that you're interviewing, that you're developing sources within the communities. Get the well-rounded education. Once you've done that, and you've gotten really good grades, and you still want to do it, I say do it. This current situation is not going to last forever. It's
True.
not. It's not. And by the time that 18 or 19-year-old gets through college, and by the way, it used to be that they mostly had master's degrees too. This administration will be gone, and there's hope there, but it's a wild ride and adventure. I would do it all over again,
Hmm.
and we need people to do it. And by the way, this applies also to all of law enforcement. I know police departments are having god awful times recruiting good people. I know it, but we need them, because there's chaos out there. There really is.
It's a sense of responsibility that most people will not step up to, and we're kind of screwed if people don't, if there's not that next generation. And even though it's a fraction of the population, a tiny fraction of a fraction that will step forward and excel all the way to that level, we absolutely need them to do so. We need that shining star that comes up and says, "I'm willing to try," or said differently, just does it, and probably didn't stop to slow down and say, I probably shouldn't go be an FBI
Yeah,
agent. They just did it.
yeah. And for those, again, a taste of FBI past. I have no idea if these programs are still happening,
Hmm.
but in the past, directors like Mueller and Comey and back to Louis Free,
Hmm.
the new agents classes at the FBI Academy
Hmm.
had a mandatory trip to the Holocaust Museum in DC,
Mm. Hmm.
later the MLK Memorial in DC.
Hmm.
And why was that? To teach them what happens when a law enforcement authority and government abuses their power and authority.
Amen.
Those are lessons that were being taught at the academy, lessons that I was taught. I have no idea if that's still going on.
Well, I want to say if you're not following Frank's account, and you probably are, because that's why you're here. 352 people in here watching with us. They all love you. I'm a nobody. I'm a guy in
Oh
Ukraine.
my gosh, you're living the battle every day, living the battle. Yeah,
But follow, not only follow his account and subscribe, but do a consideration for the paid subscription, at least at the $5 level, and
yeah,
so that we can keep your expertise in here. Because, like we said at the beginning of it, independent news is the way to go. Independent journalism is the way to go. The corporate media failed by keeping, like these restraints on, and so busy trying to meet the advertising dollar, I guess, or something else, where it just didn't happen. And now we have you directly, and you and Glenn Kirshner and these other great voices that are on this platform. And I want to point out, for instance, I can see on our platform, and I pointed this out to you a couple of weeks ago. Mike Flynn's on this platform. Douglas McGregor. I'm looking at an account right now, some recommendations, and these people who spell disinformation are right here on this platform as well. So that if we don't boost the voices that are doing the good news, for you
exactly.
guys, then those
Yeah,
other folks will.
yeah, yeah.
All
Hey,
right.
I say this almost every time we talk, Chris, but please stay safe and thanks for what you do.
I'll do my best.
All
And
right,
to
man.
everyone else, thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon. And don't forget to pay attention to your subscription notifications so you can tell when we're going live and what we're going to share. And don't forget that the articles that are posted there are typically, I don't know, I think you're doing the same thing. A lot of the articles are free to
Yeah.
read, but
Well,
the subscriptions help. And sometimes maybe there's a little extra bonus.
my shows are absolutely free, and
Yeah.
including Senator White House Today, and the column does have a paywall that's Lincoln Square. But for my paid subscribers,
Right.
you get my whole rough draft of my whole column.
Right. And one more thing is that I can say that because this gets asked sometimes, and I want to say it with you here. people don't know what goes into this work. We don't just have brilliance in our minds. Maybe you do. I don't. I have to work at it. But it takes a while to methodically put these pieces together like you're putting out. And I know you well enough to know that you put time into it. That's not just the maybe hour where you come on to discuss it. You've put a lot of time. I can tell from your presentation when you just go one to one with the audience. You've got it laid out. You've got your notes very well crafted, but it's a accumulation of a lot of hours that not seeing, and I want people to respect that, sign up, and pay that subscription for that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I know you do the same. And for the columns, boy, they are cited and overcited. So you actually, if you really want to go deep, you can click on the site. If you see, boy, that's interesting. Frank said this happened, and you click on the highlighted site, and you go right to the citation. I've got times
Yeah,
I have every sentence cited.
your articles over the last several years have always had citations throughout the body text. You've always done that. You don't just write what you think. You can see the sourcing throughout the articles. So I think people should respect that
Yeah, man. All right.
and take some
See you.
advantage of it. All right, we'll see you soon.
Care, everybody.
And
Thanks for
we'll
joining
see
us.
everyone else tomorrow night. We're going to have Craig Unger to come on, and we're going to go a little further into some of these details. We're going to talk about what's up with Iran, what's up with the administration, and we've got a lot more to go. We'll see you soon. And we say here, Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava и Пиздец, Російській Федерації. And by the way, God bless America.